At dinner, her son said, "You should start paying rent." Marge Lewis, retired librarian and widow, didn't blink. Brian grabbed seconds. Crystal never looked up from her phone. By morning, the deed was signed, the sale was closed, and movers were scheduled, before they'd even poured their coffee. She'd spent a lifetime keeping the lights on. Now she was turning them off on purpose. And when they asked what happened, the empty driveway answered for her. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The soup smelled like home. Onions softening in butter, chicken stock simmering, the faint hum of the dishwasher filling the silence between them. Marge moved slowly at the stove, wooden spoon in hand, her wrists stiff from the cold creeping through the old kitchen windows. Across the table, Crystal sat with her phone propped against a salt shaker, scrolling. The blue light flickered against her glossed lips, her eyes never lifting. Brian was talking about bills again, or rather, around them. The way he always did, circling blame without landing anywhere. "Power's gone up again," he muttered, tapping his fork against his plate. "Groceries, too. Can't keep bleeding money like this." Marge ladled soup into 3 bowls. She had been careful to stretch every dollar long before he'd been born, cutting coupons, walking instead of driving, saving enough to own this house outright. She'd taught him better, or thought she had. He cleared his throat. "Mom," he started, tone too casual. "Maybe it's time you start contributing, like, rent?" The spoon slipped slightly, tapping the rim of the pot. The sound was sharp in the quiet kitchen. Crystal didn't look up. "It's only fair," she added, her voice sugar-coated and thin. "We all live here." The silence that followed felt like frost creeping over glass. Marge set the spoon down carefully beside the stove. For a moment, she stared at the bubbling soup, at the calm, circular motion of the broth, until it blurred. She turned, slow and deliberate. "Rent," she repeated, as though testing the word for weight. Brian shifted in his chair, eyes flicking away. "Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're not using utilities. We're just trying to balance things, Mom." Marge nodded once, a measured motion. "Balance," she said softly, as if agreeing, though her voice carried something unreadable. She wiped her hands on a towel and folded it neatly on the counter. Crystal finally set her phone down. "Don't take it the wrong way," she said, smiling without warmth. "We just think it's time everyone does their part." The clock over the sink ticked once, twice. The air changed. Marge crossed to the window, the one overlooking the dark maple tree she'd planted when Brian was 8. It was bare now, the branches thin and trembling in the wind. For the first time in years, she realized this wasn't her silence anymore. It was theirs. From the living room, the TV droned faintly, an old game show rerun nobody was watching. Marge felt a buzzing in her pocket. She pulled out her phone. "Donita, you good?" The text read. Marge stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply. She typed nothing. "Not yet." Behind her, Brian coughed into the awkward stillness. "It's not a big deal, Mom. We just can't keep carrying all the weight. You know?" She turned her head slightly, enough to see him from the corner of her eye. His hair was thinning, his expression defensive. A boy pretending to be a man. "Of course," she said evenly. "I wouldn't want to be a burden." Crystal exhaled, relieved, missing the tremor under Marge's calm. "Exactly. We knew you'd understand." Marge walked back to the stove, stirred the soup once more, and turned off the burner. "Dinner's ready," she said, voice steady as ever. They ate without conversation. The only sounds were spoons clinking, chair legs scraping, Crystal's phone lighting up every few seconds with new notifications. Marge tasted nothing. The broth went down like air. Halfway through the meal, Crystal mentioned repainting the kitchen. Something bright? Maybe sage? Or cream? Brian agreed distractedly. Marge nodded along as though she'd already drifted to another place. When the plates were cleared, she stacked them in the dishwasher, wiped the counters, and rinsed the ladle under hot water. Brian had already disappeared into the den. Crystal was laughing softly into her phone in the hallway, her voice low but sharp. Marge reached for her tea mug, steady hands wrapping around the ceramic's warmth. The ticking clock seemed louder now. She looked down the hallway toward her son's closed door, then at the framed photo on the counter. The three of them smiling here 20 years ago, before the house felt like a stranger. Her phone buzzed again. Donita. Still good? Marge's thumb hovered over the keyboard. This time she typed one word. Soon. She slipped the phone into her pocket and turned off the lights, leaving the kitchen dark except for the glow of the stove clock. 9:47 p.m. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the maple branches against the glass like impatient fingers. She stood there for a moment longer, listening, her expression unreadable. Then she walked down the hallway toward her room, the boards creaking softly under her slippers. When her door closed, the house sounded different, as if it already knew something was about to change. The lock clicked softly behind her, a small, satisfying sound that separated one world from another. Marge leaned against the door for a moment, feeling the quiet settle around her like a blanket. From the hallway, faint laughter trickled in, Crystal's voice carrying that high, grating edge of someone who liked to be overheard. Marge didn't move right away. The room was dim. The bedside lamp casting a pool of amber over the dresser. On top of it sat a porcelain dish of safety pins, an old clock that ran 3 minutes slow, and a thin layer of dust that only she seemed to notice anymore. She crossed to the dresser and knelt, pulling open the bottom drawer, the one that stuck a little on cold nights. Beneath folded sweaters and a stack of library newsletters lay a manila folder. Its edges were softened by time, but the black letters were still clear. House deed, sole owner, her name, only hers. She traced the ink with one finger. It wasn't pride she felt. Not exactly. More like vindication. The years of working 2 jobs, clipping coupons, turning down vacations so that she'd never owe anyone anything. Every penny she'd saved, every decision she'd made, was written in that single line of ownership. She laid the folder on the bed and opened her laptop. The old machine whirred to life, humming like a tired bee. She typed slowly into the search bar. Fastest way to sell a home. The screen glowed in the half-dark room. She clicked link after link. Real estate firms promising cash offers, discreet closings. No repairs necessary. She read carefully, lips pressed thin, jotting notes on a scrap of paper with her old librarian's precision. Down the hall, Crystal laughed again, louder this time. "We should Airbnb her room," she said, voice echoing through the vent. Marge froze for half a second, her pen pausing in midair. Brian chuckled faintly. "That'd cover utilities for sure." "Exactly," Crystal said. "She's got the biggest room in the house, and she's hardly in it. Just saying, it's wasted space." The laughter that followed felt like nails dragging across the inside of Marge's skull. She didn't flinch outwardly, but something inside her clicked into place. Not anger, not yet, but a perfect, icy clarity. She shut the laptop slowly, the soft click almost ceremonial. The paper she'd been writing on slid neatly beneath the manila folder. She smoothed the blanket at the foot of the bed, her motions calm, methodical. From the nightstand drawer, she pulled out a small notebook, her quiet plans, Donita used to call it, filled with grocery lists, repair notes, and things she meant to do someday. She turned to a clean page and wrote 3 words in careful script. "Find agent tomorrow." Then, as if that single line steadied her pulse, she set the notebook down and looked around her room. The soft floral wallpaper, the narrow window that framed the maple tree outside, the quilt she'd sewn the year Brian went to college, every patch a piece of something she'd worn through a decade of scraping by. She sat at the edge of the bed, hands resting in her lap. The house creaked as it always did when the furnace kicked in, an old, familiar sound that no longer felt comforting. For the first time in years, Marge saw the place not as a home, but as a ledger, rooms occupied by ungrateful tenants who believed generosity was endless. Crystal's voice rose again from the living room, playful and oblivious. Maybe we should start charging guests, huh? Turn this place into something profitable. Marge stood and crossed to her closet, opened the door, and stared at the neat row of blouses. So many shades of quiet, beige, gray, pale blue. She pulled one hanger free and examined the fabric as if searching for the person who used to wear it without apology. She folded the blouse into a small overnight bag resting by the bed, not because she was leaving tonight, but because the thought of readiness comforted her. Her phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A new message from Danita. "Still up?" Marge typed back. "Always." There was a pause, then 3 dots appeared. "Got that notary kit in the car. Just say when." Marge stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply. Her reflection stared back from the black glass. Calm, lined, utterly sure. She didn't respond. Not yet. Outside, a gust of wind pressed against the window pane, shaking the maple branches against the glass. The faint laughter from the other room continued, but it sounded distant now, like a radio left on in another life. Marge turned off the lamp, the room sinking into shadow except for the silver thread of moonlight tracing the folder's edge. She lay back against the pillow and exhaled once, long and steady. Tomorrow, she told herself. Just one more sunrise in a house that didn't know whose it really was. Morning light slanted through the blinds, pale and cold. Marge was already dressed. Wool slacks, soft gray sweater, hair pinned the way she used to before parent-teacher nights. Down the hall, the muffled sound of the coffee maker sputtered. Brian's alarm blared, then silenced. She slipped on her coat before anyone noticed she was gone. Outside, Spokane was caught between seasons, patches of gold leaves melting into rain-dark pavement. She drove the old Subaru toward downtown, windshield wipers whispering rhythmically. Each red light gave her a moment to steady her thoughts. Not guilt, not hesitation, just quiet purpose. The public library sat like a memory against the cloudy sky, brick, stately, smelling faintly of paper and lemon polish. It had been her second home for 30 years. Now it was neutral ground. Paul Kim was waiting near the reference desk, a man who looked allergic to chaos. Mid-40s, pressed coat, notebook balanced in one hand. When he saw her, he offered a smile that didn't press too hard. "Mrs. Lewis?" "Marge," she corrected. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. They walked to a corner table away from the murmur of students and the hiss of the espresso machine. Paul spread a slim folder between them. No fuss, no sales pitch. "You mentioned you wanted a quiet listing. No signage, no open houses." "That's right," he nodded. "I can arrange a 24-hour exclusive showing to a pre-qualified buyer. If you want it gone by Friday, I can do it." Marge looked out the tall windows toward the gray sky. "Before Friday," she said. Paul's pen paused mid-note, but he didn't argue. "Then we'll move fast." She signed where he pointed, her name steady on the page. Each signature felt like trimming a loose thread. Clean, final. When he slid the final page across, she asked, "What happens next?" "I'll take photos this afternoon, discreetly. Buyer's agent comes tomorrow. You'll have funds within 48 hours. Marge folded the pen neatly into the folder. Perfect. Her phone buzzed. A text from Danita. "Parking lot. Got the kit." Paul glanced at his watch. "You've done this before." "Once or twice," she said with a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Outside, the wind had picked up. In the parking lot, Donita's cherry-red Buick sat crooked across two spaces, trunk slightly open. Marge slid into the passenger seat. Donita handed her a travel mug of coffee. "You look like a woman about to rob a bank." "Something close," Marge replied. The back seat was a mobile office. Folders, seal press, blue-black pens. Donita cracked her knuckles. "All right, show me where to stamp." Marge passed over the folder Paul had given her. Donita scanned the pages, lips pursed. "They won't see this coming, huh?" "No," Marge said softly. "They never see anything that doesn't revolve around them." Donita chuckled, stamping the first page with a satisfying thunk. "That's your signature twice, notarized and bulletproof." By the time Marge drove off, the sky had turned pewter, the first drops of rain tapping against the windshield. She felt lighter, not happy, but unburdened. Downtown, the county clerk's building loomed sterile and beige. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. At window 4 sat Nina Alvarez, her dark hair twisted into a knot, reading glasses perched low. "Marge Lewis," she greeted warmly. "Haven't seen you since the reading program last spring." "Life's kept me busy." Nina lowered her voice, leaning in. "Paul told me to expect you. We'll fast-track the title release. Shouldn't take more than a day." "Thank you, dear." Nina smiled, tapping away on her keyboard. "You always helped me with late fees amnesty back in high school. Consider this payback." Marge watched the screen flicker as ownership details shifted, her name floating from one document to another like a quiet revolution. When the final confirmation printed, Nina slid the paper across. "You'll get a call tomorrow morning for signature verification." Marge folded it once, tucking it into her purse. "Tomorrow's perfect." Outside, the rain had thickened, streaking the library windows as she passed them again on the walk to her car. Through the glass, she could still see Paul's silhouette at the table, already making calls. Efficient, invisible, exactly what she needed. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, the hum of the engine steady beneath her hands. In her rearview mirror, the city blurred. Brick, rain, headlights, all dissolving into motion. Her phone buzzed one last time. "Donita, want me to bring champagne or gasoline?" Marge smiled faintly, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she typed back, "Neither. Bring donuts." She placed the phone face down, shifted into drive, and pulled away. The manila folder on the passenger seat gleamed faintly under the dash light, the ink of her name catching each passing street lamp. The smell of pot roast filled the house long before they got home. Slow-cooked carrots, rosemary, the kind of meal that used to mean comfort. Marge stood at the counter, slicing bread with deliberate precision. Her motions were slow, steady, purposeful, hands that once shelved thousands of books, now arranging plates in perfect order. Outside, dusk gathered early. The maple tree at the window swayed against a bruised sky. Her reflection stared back in the glass. Calm, unhurried, but with a certain alertness behind the eyes. She set the table with cloth napkins she hadn't used in years. Crystal liked things to look magazine-ready, though she never lifted a finger to make it happen. Tonight, Marge obliged. Silverware polished, butter dish chilled, candles lit. The small gestures of a woman who knew exactly what she was about to do. The front door opened. "Smells amazing," Crystal called out, her voice bright with surprise. "It's pot roast," Marge said. "Your favorite." Crystal hung up her coat and breezed into the kitchen, already half distracted by her phone. "That's sweet, Marge. Didn't think you were feeling up for big dinners anymore." Marge smiled faintly. "I make time for what matters." Brian came in behind her, smelling faintly of motor oil and disappointment. "Hey, Mom," he said, heading straight for the fridge, Got any of that root beer left? In the drawer, Marge replied, not looking up. They gathered around the table. The scene might have looked warm to an outsider. Lamplight flickering, plates steaming, quiet domestic harmony. But beneath it, tension pulsed like an electric hum. Brian forked a piece of meat, chewed, and leaned back. You know, I've been thinking, he began, the same way he always did before announcing something expensive. That den off the kitchen, we could turn it into a media room. Mount the TV, add surround sound, make the place feel more modern. Crystal nodded eagerly. Exactly. And we should totally paint these cabinets next. The wood's so dark, it drags the whole space down. Marge spooned gravy over her potatoes, nodding slowly as if every word was a breeze passing through. Sounds nice, she said, her tone soft and unreadable. Crystal smiled, pleased with herself. Finally, right? It's time we freshen this place up. Marge's phone vibrated once against the table. She excused herself with quiet politeness, stepping into the hallway where the light dimmed. Donita, she answered softly. Everything's set, came the familiar voice. Closing's Thursday, 9 a.m. sharp. Paul says funds clear same day. Marge's lips curved slightly. Perfect. I'll bring donuts. Ha, that's my girl. You ready? I've been ready for years. She hung up and leaned briefly against the wall, eyes closed. The murmur of dinner talk filtered through, the same shallow noise that had filled her home for months. It no longer sounded like family. It sounded like static. When she returned, Brian was laughing. Crystal thinks we should knock down that wall by the pantry. Open concept, right? Crystal grinned. Brian wants to make this place HGTV worthy. Marge sat back down. You'll have your chance soon enough, she murmured. Crystal didn't catch it. Brian was already reaching for seconds. You outdid yourself tonight, Mom. Seriously, I can't remember the last time you made this. I can, Marge said, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her plate. It was the night before your father's funeral. Brian froze mid-bite. Crystal blinked, uncertain whether it was a joke. Marge smiled. Just a small, pleasant smile that gave away nothing. The conversation limped back into motion after that, awkward and shallow. They talked about the Seahawks, about the grocery prices, about Crystal's latest influencer client who totally ghosted. Marge listened, nodding where polite, offering refills, watching the details of her home as if committing them to memory. The scratch on the table from Brian's first bicycle helmet, the chipped tile by the stove, the clock above the sink still ticking 3 minutes slow. When dinner ended, she stacked the plates neatly and ran warm water into the sink. Behind her, Brian called out, "Thanks for dinner, Mom. That really hit the spot." Crystal added, "Yeah, seriously. You should cook like this more often." Marge turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and looked at them both with a serenity that almost felt holy. "Maybe I will," she said. They smiled, oblivious, disappearing down the hall into the glow of their shared screens. The kitchen was quiet again, except for the slow drip of the faucet and the hum of the refrigerator. Marge reached for her planner, sitting on the counter beside her tea. She flipped to Thursday, drew a small circle around 9 a.m., and wrote one word beneath it: deliverance. Outside, the wind rattled the maple tree, scattering its last few leaves across the porch. Marge turned off the lights, leaving the house bathed in the faint gold glow of the oven clock. The house was still dark when Marge opened her eyes. For a long moment, she lay still, listening to the rhythm of the old place, the soft tick of the baseboard heater, the faint snore from down the hall, the pipes, whispering to one another. It was 6:12 a.m. She rose without turning on a light. The floorboards remembered her steps. She dressed in layers, a cream sweater, her navy slacks, the same wool coat she'd worn the day Brian started kindergarten. On the dresser waited a small duffel, packed neatly, wallet, documents, a thermos of coffee, one change of clothes. When she opened her bedroom door, the hallway felt like a museum exhibit she was visiting for the last time. She paused outside Brian's door, hearing the low hum of his white noise machine. Crystal murmured something in her sleep. Marge smiled faintly. Still asleep through everything, she thought. At 6:45, she slipped out the front door. The air bit cold against her face. That sharp, early autumn kind of cold that carried both threat and promise. The sky hung gray and low over Manito Park's trees. Her breath came out steady as she locked the door one final time. The Subaru started on the first turn. The driveway glistened with dew, and the tires whispered against the asphalt as she drove away, leaving behind a house that wasn't truly hers anymore, though no one else knew it yet. Downtown, the streets were still half asleep. Office windows glowed pale yellow, and a lone jogger passed through puddles with quick, even strides. Marge parked outside the title office and sat for a moment, watching her reflection in the rearview mirror, calm, gray eyes and the faintest hint of a smile. Inside, the warmth of the building smelled faintly of printer ink and coffee. Nina waved her over. "Morning, Marge. We're all set for you." Paul was already seated at the conference table, sleeves rolled up, tablet glowing with numbers. "I've got the final settlement sheet right here. No surprises," he said, voice efficient but kind. Marge nodded. "I'm not fond of surprises." The papers came one by one: title transfer, acknowledgement, seller's affidavit. Each signature felt quieter than the last. By the time she signed the final line, her hand was steady enough to pour tea. Paul gathered the stack, checking off fields. "Funds will wire before noon. Buyer's waiting down the hall. She's eager." "Let her in," Marge said. The door opened, and a woman about 30 stepped in, clutching a folder and a nervous smile. Tessa Lee. Small-framed, eyes bright but cautious. She looked like someone still amazed the world had said yes to her. "Marge Lewis?" she asked, extending her hand. "That's me," Marge said, shaking it firmly. I didn't think I could ever own a place like this," Tessa said, voice cracking slightly. "It's beautiful. Feels lived in, like someone loved it." Marge studied her face, the gratitude there, the innocence. She nodded once. "Take good care of it." Tessa's eyes glistened. "I will." For the first time that morning, Marge let herself smile, small and real. When Tessa left, Paul stood, offering his hand. "You did it, Marge. Smooth as clockwork." "Thank you for keeping it quiet," she said. He gave a knowing nod. "Discretion's part of the service." Nina returned from the counter with a printout. "Wires confirmed pending release. You'll get the funds within the hour." Marge took the paper, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her bag. "I'll be waiting." An hour later, at a small diner 3 blocks from the courthouse, Marge sat by the window with a plate of eggs growing cold. Her phone buzzed once. Wire confirmed. She set down her fork and opened her laptop. The banking site asked for verification. Her fingers moved with slow precision. The amount appeared in bold digits. More than enough to start over twice, if she wanted. She clicked Transfer Funds. In the memo line, she typed, "Marge Lewis Reclamation Fund." The name looked almost regal, and it made her laugh quietly, the kind of laugh that startled even her. Around her, the diner clinked with morning chatter, oblivious. When the transfer confirmed, a soft blue checkmark bloomed on the screen. Done. Outside, a moving truck rolled through the drizzle, and for a fleeting second she wondered if it was already heading toward Rosewood Avenue, toward the house she'd just handed off without a backward glance. Her phone buzzed again. Donita this time. "Tell me you did it." Marge typed back. "All wrapped." Bring extra napkins for the donuts. She finished her coffee, left a generous tip, and stood, slipping her coat over her shoulders. Through the window, the rain had eased to a fine mist, Spokane wrapped in its gray quiet. Somewhere across town, two people still slept beneath her old roof, unaware that the floor beneath them had already changed hands. Marge stepped out into the street, her umbrella snapping open with a soft click. Her stride was light, measured. The morning air smelled faintly of wet leaves and victory. By the time Marge pulled into the driveway, the clouds had thinned into a pale, forgiving blue. Noon light touched the maple tree like a quiet witness. Soft, golden, indifferent. Her house looked the same as it always had. Peeling white trim, uneven porch steps. Brian's old sneakers kicked against the siding. But to her, it already felt like someone else's memory. She parked, cut the engine, and sat for a few seconds with her hands on the steering wheel. Calm. Not triumphant, not guilty. Just calm. Inside, the house smelled faintly of reheated coffee and fabric softener. The TV hummed from the den, another daytime rerun of Judge Judy. Brian was half dozing on the couch, socks on the coffee table. He stirred when he saw her. "Hey, Mom. Didn't even hear you leave this morning." "Just errands," she said, slipping out of her coat. He pointed toward the hallway. "When you get a sec, could you vacuum your area? Crystal says there's dust along the baseboards again." "Her area?" Marge nodded, expression steady. "Of course." He smiled, already turning back to the screen. "Thanks. You're the best." She carried her duffel to her bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. For a moment, she simply stood there, listening to the muted television through the wall. Then she exhaled and began folding laundry, slow, deliberate motions that felt almost ceremonial. Sweaters into neat piles, socks rolled tight, a lifetime of domestic reflexes, honed through decades of tending to other people's comfort. But this time, every fold was a farewell. The manila folder was still on her nightstand, now joined by a small brass key ring. She picked it up. 3 keys, labeled neatly by Donita's handwriting. Storage Unit 418, Lincoln Street Depot. Her phone buzzed, a text from Donita. "Keys delivered, units ready. They'll hold your boxes till next month. No rush." Marge typed back, "Got them, thank you." The clock read 2:37 p.m., 7 hours until morning. 7 hours until everything she'd built and surrendered and reclaimed intersected in one unremarkable driveway. She pulled a cardboard box from beneath the bed, the last one she'd saved. Inside, she placed only what mattered: a framed photo of her and Donita at the library retirement party, her late husband's pocket watch, a small stack of letters from former students. The rest, linens, books, knickknacks, could go to Tessa. A house deserved to be lived in, not hoarded. From the living room came Crystal's voice, rising sharp and impatient. "Brian, did you see this? Someone parked on the street again. It's like people think they can just—" Marge closed her eyes, tuning it out. That voice, that tone, the one that never asked, only demanded. She sealed the box with a strip of tape, pressed it flat, and set it beside her duffel. Her movements were quiet, practiced, almost reverent. The house creaked as the wind shifted outside. She looked around one last time. The faded wallpaper, the small dresser she'd refinished herself, the window that caught the morning sun. Everything looked still, suspended. At 4:10 p.m., Donita's cherry-red Buick rolled up out front. Marge opened the door before her friend could knock. Donita grinned, holding up a paper bag. "Storage keys, extra tape, and jelly donuts. Priorities." "You always know what matters," Marge said, taking the bag. Donita's eyes flicked past her shoulder into the house. "They home? Half asleep and half unaware. Good. Less drama that way." Marge nodded. "Tessa's crew comes at 7. She'll have the place before they've even finished their coffee. Donita let out a low whistle. I'll bring the truck around first thing. You sure you don't want me here when it happens? I want it quiet, Marge said. No witnesses, no noise. Damn, Donita said softly. You're colder than the notary stamp. Marge smiled. I've earned it. They shared a brief hug, the kind that meant both farewell and victory. Then Donita stepped back, keys jingling in her hand. Text me when you're out. I will. When the Buick pulled away, the street fell silent again. Evening shadows crept across the yard. Inside, Marge boiled water for tea, sat at her desk, and began labeling envelopes with her new address. One for the bank, one for the utilities, one for the Spokane Senior Center. Each pen stroke felt like another small door closing neatly behind her. By midnight, the house was dark again. The only light came from under her door, a faint glow spilling across the hallway carpet. Marge finished taping the last box, stacked it neatly by the dresser, and checked her phone. 11:58 p.m. She set her alarm for 6:30, just enough time to brew coffee, take one last look around, and step out before the moving truck arrived. Before she turned out the lamp, she placed the house keys on the nightstand, 3 dull pieces of brass that had once meant everything. She looked at them for a long, quiet moment. Then, with a small, deliberate motion, she slid them into the top drawer and closed it. The alarm buzzed at 6:30 sharp. Marge silenced it before it could finish the first ring. For a long, still moment, she sat at the edge of the bed, watching the faint gray light slip through the blinds. The house was motionless, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. She rose, dressed in the same cream sweater from yesterday, and brewed coffee in the kitchen without turning on a single light. 6:58. She poured the coffee into her travel mug, leaned against the counter, and waited. At 7:02, a polite knock echoed through the hallway. 3 short raps, firm, cheerful. From down the hall, Crystal's voice floated out, groggy and irritated. Brian, someone's at the door. Who the hell? It's Saturday. The knock came again, gentler this time. Marge sipped her coffee. Crystal appeared in the hallway wearing a pink robe in confusion, hair tousled like static. She pulled the door open halfway, blinking into the morning light. On the porch stood Tessa Lee, clipboard in hand, her breath misting in the cool air. Behind her, 2 movers unloaded furniture from a white truck with Spokane Home Solutions printed across the side. Hi there, Tessa said brightly. We're here for the move-in. This is 142 Rosewood, right? Crystal frowned. Excuse me? Tessa glanced at her clipboard, oblivious to the tension starting to curdle in the doorway. We're right on time. 7 o'clock delivery window. Delivery for what? Crystal's voice sharpened. Move in, Tessa said simply. The purchase closed yesterday. For a moment, the words hung there, meaningless, like another language entirely. Then Crystal's eyes widened. You're joking. By then, Brian had stumbled into the entryway, barefoot and blinking. What's going on? The hell if I know, Crystal hissed. This woman says she's moving in. Brian turned to Tessa, bewildered. There's no way. There's been some mistake. Tessa's smile faltered, uncertainty creeping in. You're the previous owners? Brian laughed, but it came out brittle. We still are the owners. A floorboard creaked behind them. Marge appeared in the hallway, coffee in hand, calm as dawn. No, she said quietly. You're not. They both turned. Crystal's mouth fell open. Mom, what did you just say? Marge walked past them to the porch, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. She looked at Tessa and nodded kindly. You're right on time. Everything's ready for you. Tessa blinked, uncertain. Mrs. Lewis? Marge smiled faintly. You can just call me Marge now. The movers froze mid-step, sensing tension they couldn't name. Brian stepped forward, his face pale. Mom, what's happening? What do you mean everything's ready? I mean, Marge said evenly, I sold the house. Crystal let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. You… what? Marge took another sip of her coffee. It closed yesterday morning. You sold our… house? Crystal screamed, voice cracking into the still air. Birds startled from the maple tree outside. Somewhere down the street, a dog began barking. Tessa stepped back, startled. I'm sorry, I didn't realize… No, you're fine, Marge said, her tone almost gentle. You have every right to be here. The deed's yours. Brian's hands were trembling. Mom, you can't… We live here. We live here. No, Marge said softly. You stayed here. Crystal's eyes were wet with fury. You've lost your damn mind. After everything we've done for you. Marge raised her mug slightly, as if toasting them. After everything I've done for you, you mean? Brian's voice dropped, small now. Where will we go? She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a flicker of a moment, there was something like sorrow behind her eyes. Then it was gone. I'm sure you'll figure it out, she said. You've always been resourceful when it suits you. From the truck, one of the movers called out, Ma'am, should we start unloading? Tessa hesitated, glancing between them. Marge nodded once. Yes, please. Crystal gasped. You can't just let strangers move our stuff out. It's not your stuff anymore, Marge said simply. I left you the coffee pot, though. You might need it. Brian turned, desperate. Mom, please. But she was already walking down the porch steps, past the movers and their boxes, into the bright, cold morning. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Donita. Everything going as planned? Marge typed back one word as she walked toward her car. Perfectly. She didn't look back when Crystal's voice cracked the air again, a mixture of disbelief and rage. Instead, she set her coffee on the roof of the Subaru, took a deep breath, and slid into the driver's seat. Through the windshield, she could see Tessa standing on the porch, keys in hand, watching the chaos unfold, wide-eyed, hesitant, but ready. Marge smiled faintly, turned the key in the ignition, and whispered to herself, New day. Brian's voice tore through the morning quiet before the door even slammed open. Mom, where are we supposed to go? Marge was halfway down the driveway, coffee steaming in her hand, the October air curling white against her breath. She didn't turn immediately. Behind her, the sound of Crystal's bare feet slapped against the porch boards as she shouted, You can't just walk away from this. This is crazy. Marge turned then, calm and deliberate. Her breath fogged softly in the cold, her face composed, her mug steady. I'm sure Airbnb has something, she said. Brian's expression collapsed into something between disbelief and desperation. Are you kidding me? We live here. You can't just… I can, she said, not cruelly, just as a statement of fact. And I did. Crystal's voice pitched, higher, cracking. You're insane. Marge's gaze didn't waver. No, just done. It was said so quietly, so evenly, that the words seemed to echo louder than if she'd shouted them. Brian ran a hand through his hair, pacing in the driveway like someone trying to wake from a bad dream. We don't even have a plan. We don't have a… That's not my problem anymore, Marge said. You had a plan. It was called me. Crystal stared at her, shaking her head in disbelief, arms crossed tight over her robe. You won't even explain yourself? There's nothing to explain. For a moment, the wind filled the silence. The maple tree whispered overhead, scattering the last of its yellow leaves onto the lawn that was no longer theirs. Behind them, the movers carried in a small crib, the soft sound of wood against hardwood floor echoing through the open door. Tessa stood inside the threshold, nervous and apologetic. I'm so sorry I didn't… Marge waved her off gently. Don't apologize. You're home now. Crystal spun toward her, furious. You can't just replace us with strangers. Marge raised an eyebrow. Strangers who appreciate what they have. A cherry-red Buick turned the corner then, slowing in front of the house. Donita's window rolled down. You good? She called. Marge's mouth curved faintly. Perfect timing. Donita parked, stepping out with her usual brisk confidence, the kind that had soothed Marge through every hard day of her life. Got your bag in the trunk, she said, popping it open. Brian blinked at her. You knew about this? Donita smiled sweetly. Honey, I stamped the papers. Crystal gasped, horrified. Oh my God. Donita ignored her, walking up the drive. Let's get this show on the road. Storage units open, condos ready, and you've got about 5 minutes before they start moving that sectional. Marge handed her the duffel, and Donita tucked it neatly into the Buick's trunk. Brian took a step closer. Mom, please, he said, voice cracking on the word. Can't we just talk about this? You blindsided us. She looked at him then. Really looked. Seeing the boy who used to scrape his knees under that same maple tree, the man who'd somehow forgotten gratitude somewhere along the way. I tried talking, she said softly. For months. You mistook silence for agreement. He shook his head, tears of anger rising. You didn't have to do this. She took a slow sip of her coffee. I did. From the open door behind them, laughter spilled. Small, innocent laughter. Marge turned slightly, watching as Tessa's 2-year-old toddled into the living room, clutching a stuffed rabbit, while one of the movers adjusted the crib against the wall. The sound landed like a benediction. Crystal spun to see what Marge was looking at. You're really just going to let them move in, while we're still standing, here? Marge's answer was quiet but absolute. Yes. Donita shut the trunk with a satisfying thud. All packed, boss lady. Marge gave her a small nod. Thank you. Then, to Brian and Crystal, she added, You should go gather your things. The new owner deserves peace on her first morning. Crystal let out a strangled sound, part laugh, part sob. Brian didn't move. Marge stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. This house stopped being a home a long time ago. You just didn't notice. The words hung there, sharp and clean as glass. Finally, she turned to Donita. Let's go. As she opened the passenger door, Tessa called after her from the porch. Mrs. Lewis? Marge looked back one last time. Tessa smiled nervously, rocking her child on her hip. Thank you. For everything. Marge returned the smile, small and genuine. Take good care of it. She got into the Buick. The door shut with a quiet finality. Through the window, she watched as the movers carried in another box labeled Nursery. Brian stood in the driveway, frozen in disbelief, while Crystal muttered something venomous under her breath. The sound of new laughter drifted from the open doorway, light and free, mixing with the crisp morning air. Marge turned her head forward, her reflection steady in the glass. Let's go get breakfast, she said. Donita grinned, starting the engine. You buying? Marge took another sip of her coffee. With pleasure. The car rolled away, leaving the house shrinking in the rearview mirror. Not her house, not her burden, not her problem. By Monday morning, Spokane had shaken off its weekend quiet, but the Lewis house on Rosewood sat under a strange stillness, a hollow calm. The moving trucks were gone. The porch light had been replaced. The new curtains in the front window glowed a soft cream instead of Marge's faded plaid. Across town, Brian sat in a borrowed apartment with a bad internet connection and worse coffee. He'd been awake since dawn, staring at his phone, waiting for a miracle. The lawyer's voice crackled through the line, cool and steady. Mr. Lewis, I reviewed the documents you sent. The deed was solely in your mother's name. The sale was executed legally and notarized. There's nothing you can contest. Brian gripped the phone tighter. But she didn't tell us. We live there. That has to count for something. I'm afraid occupancy doesn't override ownership. He slumped forward on the edge of the couch. So she can just kick us out? Like that? Yes, the lawyer said. And she did. The line went dead before Brian realized he'd hung up first. Crystal, sitting at the kitchen counter in an oversized sweatshirt, was scrolling furiously through Facebook. She's acting like nothing happened, she hissed. Look at this. She posted a picture of a plant. Brian blinked at her. A plant? A freaking fern, Brian. With the caption, "New Roots." You can't make this up. He rubbed his temples. Just leave it alone. Oh, hell no. Crystal's fingers flew across the keyboard. Her post went up within seconds. Imagine your own mother selling your home out from under you. Some people have no loyalty, no heart. Within minutes, comments poured in, a mix of sympathy and curiosity. Then came the ones she didn't expect. Maybe don't freeload off your mom in the first place. She's a legend. Tell her to write a book. Team Marge forever. Crystal's face flushed. They're laughing at us. Brian didn't answer. His phone buzzed again. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Brian Lewis? A woman's voice asked. Yeah, who's this? This is Nina Alvarez with Spokane Title. Just confirming you've been removed from all future property correspondence. The sale has fully cleared. His throat tightened. Right, he said. Of course. He hung up and stared at the wall. A faint stain shaped like the state of Idaho stared back at him from the peeling wallpaper. He wondered how long they could stay here before even this place slipped away. Across town, Marge's new condo smelled of lemon oil and clean beginnings. Afternoon light spilled across the hardwood floor, catching on the corners of stacked boxes labeled neatly in her handwriting. Donita stood in the doorway holding a bottle of champagne. I figured we'd skip the donuts today. Marge looked up from where she was arranging books on a narrow shelf. That's dangerous at our age. Donita grinned. So's revenge. They clinked glasses, the soft pop of the cork echoing in the quiet space. To quiet exits, Marge said. To earned ones, Donita replied. They drank, the fizz catching in Marge's throat before settling into a warmth that reached somewhere deeper than relief. From the balcony, she could see Manito Park stretching below, the same park she used to walk past on her way home, the same trees, the same skyline. Only now, it didn't belong to her past. It belonged to her peace. Her phone buzzed on the table. Another Facebook notification. Donita picked it up and read aloud, smirking. Oh, she's mad. Can't believe my husband's mother thinks this is empowerment. Girl, she's making herself look bad. Marge set down her glass and typed slowly, carefully. Just because someone lets you stay doesn't mean you belong. She hit post and locked the phone. Donita burst out laughing. You're ruthless. Marge smiled, faint and tired. No, just honest. The laughter faded into a comfortable silence. Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains. The condo smelled faintly of new paint and possibility. On the dining table sat a single manila envelope marked Confidential. The one Paul had couriered that morning. Marge slid it closer, broke the seal, and unfolded the paperwork. Her will. Updated, notarized, final. She picked up her pen, poised it over the line, and added a single amendment with precise, deliberate handwriting. Beneficiary removal, Brian Lewis. She signed, dated it, and sat back in her chair. For a moment, she simply watched the ink dry, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Then she folded the document neatly, slipped it back into the envelope, and sealed it with a firm press of her thumb. Donita raised an eyebrow. That what I think it is? Marge looked out the window, eyes following the wind through the maples. It's what needed to be done. Donita lifted her glass again. To no second chances. Marge touched hers to it gently. To new ones. They drank. The soft clink of glass against glass punctuating the moment like a heartbeat. The message came on a gray Thursday morning, somewhere between her second cup of coffee and the start of her volunteer shift at the community center. Marge's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a familiar name she hadn't seen since the day she drove away from Rosewood Avenue. Brian. You blindsided us. I'm sorry. Please reconsider. She stared at it for a moment. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just still. Outside, the street below her condo was lined with red and gold leaves, the season leaning toward winter. She could see a man walking his dog, a bus hissing to a stop. Life had gone on. She set the mug down, wiped her hands on a towel, and reread the text once more. The words were thin, half-measured, more self-preservation than remorse. Then she opened a new message thread and forwarded it to Patrice, attorney at law. The same woman who'd handled the trust. Paperwork. Marge. Please file this under contact documentation, for record only. Patrice's reply came back within minutes. Understood. Hope you're enjoying the quiet life. Marge smiled faintly, immensely. She set her phone aside, humming softly as she slipped into her cardigan. The library reading program started at 9, and she never liked to be late. The children's reading room at the Spokane Community Center smelled like washable markers and old carpet. A dozen kids sat in a semicircle, their faces lit with the restless curiosity only a Thursday morning could hold. Marge held up a copy of Charlotte's Web and smiled. All right, who remembers what a runt is? Hands shot up. A boy named Eli answered. It's the smallest pig. Exactly, she said. And sometimes, the smallest things surprise everyone. The group leaned in as she began reading, her voice calm and rhythmic, each sentence landing with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime guiding young minds through words. When the session ended, the children scrambled up for snack time. One little girl with pigtails lingered behind. Miss Marge, she asked shyly, did you really used to be a librarian? Marge chuckled. I still am, dear. I just changed branches. The girl grinned and ran off. As she gathered her things, her phone buzzed again. A Venmo notification this time. Crystal Lewis requests 300 nubbals. Emotional damages. Marge blinked once, amused. Then, with the unhurried patience of a woman who had stopped reacting to nonsense decades ago, she hit decline. Then she hit share. Within seconds, the screenshot appeared on her Facebook page with a simple caption, "Emotional damages are self-inflicted." The comments section exploded almost instantly. Old library co-workers, former students, and a few retirees from her book club cheering her on. Queen behavior. Can't invoice consequences, honey. She's playing chess while they're still learning checkers. Donita called 5 minutes later, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. You're trending, Marge. Half of Spokane wants to take you out for coffee. I only drink tea now, Marge said, smiling into her cup. That afternoon, a knock came at her condo door. When she opened it, Tessa stood there, holding a small box of pastries and a shy smile. Hi, she said. I hope this isn't weird, but I just wanted to say thank you again. The house? It's everything. The kids love it. Marge stepped aside. Come in, dear. I was just about to make tea. They sat at her small kitchen table, the sunlight spilling across the countertop. Tessa set down the pastries, lemon scones still warm, and looked almost sheepish. I keep finding little things you left. A gardening trowel in the shed, a stack of recipe cards in the drawer. I thought maybe I should return them, but they just belong there. Marge's smile softened. Then leave them. Homes. Remember kindness. That's why they last. Tessa hesitated. I don't know what you went through with your family, but you did the right thing. Marge sipped her tea, eyes warm but steady. Sometimes the right thing doesn't feel right. It just stops hurting. They sat quietly after that, the comfort of silence filling the space where pain used to live. Later that evening, as dusk folded across the city, Marge stepped onto her balcony. The air was cold, crisp, laced with pine from the park below. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, another attempt to reach her, but she didn't check it. Instead, she looked at the distant lights of Rosewood Avenue, faintly visible beyond the trees, and whispered to herself, "Peace earned is peace kept." Inside, her kettle began to whistle. Monday mornings used to carry weight. Appointments, errands, Brian's calls about small disasters that somehow became hers to fix. Now, the silence held differently. Lighter. Marge poured herself a cup of tea and opened her laptop. The inbox blinked with the usual newsletters, utility confirmations, a recipe email she'd subscribed to months ago. And then, his name. From Brian Lewis. Subject: Just look, please. She hovered for a long moment before clicking. The email opened into paragraphs of numbers and desperation. Attached was a color-coded spreadsheet. Rent overdue, utilities past due, a note that said, "We're 2 months behind, but we can catch up if you just help us get started." At the bottom, one line stood out. "I know things got tense, but you're still my mom. Please, just this once. We'll pay you back." Marge stared at it. The spreadsheet, the plea, the soft manipulation hidden between words he didn't even realize he'd repeated his whole life. Her thumb rested on the trackpad. She didn't reply. Didn't forward it to Patrice this time. She simply pressed delete. The confirmation window popped up. "Are you sure you want to move this message to trash?" "Yes," she said aloud. Her own voice startled her. Steady, certain, unflinching. The inbox cleared, and the quiet that followed was its own kind of music. Later that afternoon, the city was wrapped in pale sunlight that made everything feel washed clean. Marge set a baking sheet on the counter, scooping dough into neat circles. The smell of vanilla and butter filled her small condo, curling through every corner like memory without regret. She wasn't baking for herself. The cookies were for Tessa's kids. Small, noisy, wonderfully chaotic children who had already started leaving chalk drawings on her condo doorstep with crooked hearts and spelling errors that made her laugh. As the oven ticked softly, her phone buzzed with another notification. This time, Facebook. Crystal Lewis posted, "Some people think money replaces family." Within minutes, reactions began piling in. A small audience that loved drama more than truth. Danita, never one to let foolishness fester, left a single comment beneath it. Some people mistake generosity for obligation. The comment racked up likes faster than Crystal's post. Marge read it once, smiled, and set her phone face down. She refused to give them what they wanted: engagement, outrage, attention. Instead, she opened the oven and pulled out the cookies, golden at the edges, soft in the center. The scent filled the room, warm and forgiving. She arranged them carefully into a tin, lined with a paper napkin printed with little sunflowers. On the lid, she wrote a short note. "For the little ones, from Miss Marge." By evening, the condo glowed with the amber hue of late sunlight filtering through clean glass. The quiet was deep, but not lonely. Marge walked slowly through the space, her space, bare feet brushing against the smooth floor. She paused by the bookshelf, tracing the spines she'd unpacked weeks ago. The Secret Garden, East of Eden, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. All stories about people who built peace out of pain. No shouting, no passive sighs from the living room, no TV noise, no one calling her name because they couldn't find the remote. Just the hum of her own breathing. She stopped at the balcony door and stepped outside. The autumn air carried the faint smell of cinnamon from a cafe below. Across the street, lights flickered on in other windows, small lives continuing in quiet rhythms. She thought of Brian and Crystal. Maybe still arguing, maybe still pretending their misfortune was someone else's fault. Maybe they'd finally realized what it meant to lose the thing they treated as permanent. Marge took a slow sip of her tea. It was still warm. Inside, the timer beeped. Not for the cookies this time, but as a reminder she'd set earlier. Call community center about Saturday event. She smiled. Life now ran on her schedule, not theirs. That night, she wrapped the cookie tin in brown paper and tied it with twine, ready for delivery. As she placed it by the door, her phone buzzed once more. A new email. From Spokane Senior Center. Subject line: Invitation to speak. Rebuilding after relinquishing. Marge tilted her head, smiling faintly. She closed the laptop without answering yet. Some decisions, she thought, deserved to be savored. The first morning without any boxes felt like a fresh breath. The condo was finally hers in every sense. No storage bins stacked in corners, no echoes of other people's voices haunting the walls. Marge stood in the middle of her guest room, a blank canvas of pale light and potential. The walls were bare, the floor gleaming from yesterday's mop, the air scented faintly of lavender and lemon polish. For a long moment, she simply looked around and smiled. This room, she decided, would hold something worth keeping. She unpacked slowly, deliberately, stacks of books. Her real inheritance. Steinbeck, Morrison, Welty, Dickinson. Old paperbacks with creased spines and notes in the margins. From students she'd once mentored. She arranged them by instinct, not alphabet, creating small constellations of memory. When she finished, the walls felt softer somehow. Lived in, like they'd begun to understand who she was. At a thrift shop off Fifth Avenue, she'd found the perfect reading chair. Deep green corduroy, wide enough to curl into. It smelled faintly of cedar and patience. She placed it by the window, angled toward the light, and draped a handmade quilt over the arm. A little lamp sat beside it, the kind with a pull chain that made the smallest, most satisfying click. The delivery truck arrived that afternoon with her new bedroom set. All hers. All chosen. No debates over fabric swatches. No, "You sure that's practical?" from Brian. No rolled eyes from Crystal when she preferred oak over particle board. The furniture was simple. Warm wood, clean lines, built to last. When the delivery men left, she opened every drawer just to smell the raw pine inside. Ownership wasn't just in the paperwork, it was in the quiet joy of selecting each piece without compromise. As twilight fell, she hung the final touch on the far wall above the bookshelf, a square canvas she'd ordered online. The letters were hand-painted in soft gray script. Peace lives here. She stepped back, folded her arms, and exhaled. The words weren't decoration. They were declaration. The next morning, a knock on her door interrupted her tea. When she opened it, she found a florist's box, pale yellow roses with sprigs of eucalyptus. A small card was tucked between the stems. "You help me dream. Caleb L." She blinked, then laughed quietly to herself. Caleb, the awkward, wide-eyed boy from her 7th grade reading class who'd struggled to pronounce metaphor. Now, 20 years later, he was an architect in Seattle. He'd written her last year to say she'd changed how he thought about possibility. Marge placed the flowers in a glass vase and set them near the canvas. The soft yellow petals brightened the room instantly, as if gratitude itself had taken root there. She stood for a long moment, admiring them, her reflection faint in the window. "Real family always shows up," she murmured, almost to herself. Later, Donita dropped by unannounced, knocking once before letting herself in, arms full of paper bags from the farmer's market. I come bearing peaches and gossip, she announced, setting them on the counter. Marge grinned. In that order? Depends how juicy the gossip is. Donita leaned against the counter, eyeing the guest room through the open doorway. Well, look at that. You turned it into a little library. Knew you would? It's a start, Marge said, folding a dish towel. Feels clean, uncluttered. Donita smiled knowingly. So, the million-dollar question, you ever regret it? Marge looked up at her friend, the pause stretching just long enough to let the question breathe. She turned toward the guest room, where sunlight fell across the open books and the vase of flowers glowed softly in its beam. No, she said finally. Not for a second. Donita let out a low whistle. That's what I figured. Still, it's wild. Most people your age are scared to start over. I wasn't scared, Marge said, her tone quiet but unwavering. I was suffocating. They shared a long, comfortable silence. Outside, wind brushed through the trees, carrying the sound of distant laughter from the park below. Donita finally smiled. So what's next, Miss Independent? Marge wiped her hands and poured them both tea. I'm thinking of hosting a book night. Maybe invite a few neighbors. No drama, just good stories and better company. Sounds like heaven, Donita said, raising her cup. It is, Marge replied. They drank in companionable silence, two women who had outlasted everything that tried to define them. The rain had softened by late afternoon, leaving behind the smell of damp pavement and pine. Marge walked the familiar route down Rosewood Avenue, her umbrella resting against her shoulder, droplets gathering along its edge. The rhythm of her steps matched the sound of the wet leaves beneath her shoes. When she reached the bend in the street, she slowed. The old house stood there, freshly painted, window boxes blooming with bright geraniums and trailing ivy. The porch railings gleamed white, no longer peeling. Someone had repaired the cracked front step. It was the same house, and yet it wasn't. Through the wide front window, she could see Tessa moving about inside, her toddler perched on one hip, the baby's laughter carrying faintly through the screen door. There were toys scattered on the rug, a pot simmering on the stove, and the kind of warm chaos that comes from belonging. Marge smiled, the kind of small, private smile that sits somewhere deep in the chest. She reached into her tote and pulled out a slim, cloth-bound journal. Its cover was navy blue, the pages lined in neat cursive. She'd written in it for months, recipes, advice, fragments of memory. On the first page, in careful handwriting, she'd written a simple inscription, "To the next matriarch." She stepped quietly up the walkway and placed the book on the porch beside the planter box. No note, no explanation. Just a small gift from one keeper of a home to another. The screen door opened behind her. Marge? Tessa stood there, wiping her hands on a towel. Oh, hi. I didn't see you. Marge smiled. I was just in the neighborhood. Tessa's face lit up. The garden's doing so well. The soil by the fence. You were right, it just needed turning. I knew you'd figure it out, Marge said. They stood there for a moment, the quiet between them easy and companionable. Behind Tessa, the sound of her children playing filled the air. It looks like it's been good to you, Marge said softly. It has, Tessa replied, her voice warm. Thank you for trusting me with it. Marge nodded once. It wasn't trust. It was instinct. Then she turned to leave. Halfway down the sidewalk, her phone buzzed. She stopped beneath the dripping maple tree and pulled it from her coat pocket. The message preview glowed against the gray sky. Crystal. We're drowning. Please talk to him. Marge stared at the words until the screen dimmed and the phone went black. She slid it back into her pocket without replying. Some messages didn't deserve resurrection. The rental they'd found was on the east edge of town, a squat, beige complex that smelled faintly of mildew and resignation. The carpet was threadbare, the walls still bore faint outlines where other people's pictures had hung. Brian spent most of his days scrolling job boards he never applied to. Crystal sold clothes online and blamed everyone else for why nothing sold. Marge didn't know these details firsthand. She didn't need to. Some declines, she'd learned, were predictable in rhythm, slow, avoidable, and self-made. That weekend, Marge attended the first neighborhood meeting at her condo complex. Retirees and young professionals, mixed in a bright community room that smelled of coffee and new carpet. She'd brought oatmeal cookies. Donita had warned her that was how they make you president of something, but she didn't mind. As the meeting wrapped, a woman approached her, late 40s, polished but kind-eyed. "You're Marjorie Lewis, right? I'm Dana. I run outreach for the senior center downtown. We've been following your posts about independence and housing transitions. They've really resonated." Marge blinked, half amused. "My posts?" Dana smiled. "You've got a following, you know. Emotional damages are self-inflicted? That one's famous. We'd love to have you speak at our financial literacy panel next month. Topics: empowerment after retirement." Marge laughed softly. "Me? I'm not an expert." Dana tilted her head. "You don't have to be an expert. You just have to be living proof." Something inside her shifted. Not pride, exactly, but recognition. The kind of knowing that only comes when you've walked through fire and learned how to keep your footing. "I'll think about it," Marge said. "Good," Dana replied. "We'll save you a seat." That evening, Marge walked home with a bouquet of hydrangeas Dana had insisted she take. The sky had turned lilac, the streets damp but shining. When she reached her building, she paused at the entrance, looking up at the light glowing through her own window. Soft, steady, waiting. Inside, she placed the flowers in a vase beside the Peace Lives Here canvas. The yellow roses from Caleb were gone now, but the vase still held their faint scent. She sat in her reading chair, the one angled perfectly toward the window, and opened her notebook to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, "Panel notes, financial independence for seniors." Then, just beneath it, Lesson 1. Freedom is not bought, it's reclaimed. She closed the notebook and smiled. The next morning, she woke early. Sunlight spilled through her window, warming the green chair and the wooden floor. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Crystal, this time unreadable through swollen eyes and regret. Marge didn't open it. She simply turned the phone face down, poured herself tea, and stepped out to the balcony. The world below stirred to life. Buses groaning, joggers passing, birds shaking dew from their wings. Marge closed her eyes, breathing in the crisp air, the scent of a city that finally felt like hers. She hadn't lost her home. She'd redefined it. The notary's pen clicked once, a crisp, final sound that seemed to echo in the quiet office. Marge signed the last line with deliberate care, her handwriting small but steady. "There," she said, pushing the document slightly forward. "It's done." Patrice glanced over the pages, her glasses slipping down her nose. 80% to the Literacy Foundation, 20% to the local scholarship fund. You're certain you want no family beneficiaries? "I'm certain," Marge said. Her tone was calm, almost serene. "I already gave them years. That's inheritance enough." Patrice smiled softly, pressing the notary stamp with a sharp thunk. "It's admirable, you know. Most people cling to the past when they get older. You're building forward." "I wasted too much time in rooms that didn't belong to me," Marge replied. "Now I'm furnishing the future I choose." When she stepped out of the office, the afternoon light felt different. Lighter somehow, thinner, as though the world itself had let go of something heavy. A week later, Marge received an envelope at her condo, the kind with bright crayon handwriting across the front. Inside was a folded sheet of paper dotted with glue and glitter, two uneven hearts drawn in pink marker. In the center, in clumsy block letters, it read, "Thank you, Miss Marge. You gave us a home." Beneath the message were small scribbles that might have been flowers or stars. She recognized the names in shaky print, Maya and Oliver, Tessa's children. Marge laughed, a warm, surprised sound, and pinned the card to her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like an open book. She stared at it for a long time. Of all the words she'd collected across her life, student essays, library records, the thousands of pages she'd read and reshelved, those 7 might have been the most meaningful. At the senior center, she'd grown into a quiet kind of leadership. The first few meetings after her panel had drawn larger crowds than expected. Women in their 60s and 70s, some clutching notebooks, others simply clutching hope. Now, every Tuesday, she sat in the center's library with 2 of them. Ruth, who'd spent her whole life putting her husband's name on everything, and Jeanette, who'd never learned how to say no to her grown children's emergencies. The 3 women shared tea and truth. Ruth was the first to break. One afternoon, twisting her napkin in her hands. "It's strange, isn't it, to realize you've been needed for the wrong reasons." Marge reached across the table, touching her hand lightly. "Needed isn't the same as valued. It just takes some of us longer to tell the difference." Jeanette smiled weakly. "You make it sound so easy." "Oh, it's not," Marge said, "but it gets easier once you stop asking permission to breathe." The group laughed softly, a sound full of relief and recognition. When the meeting ended, Ruth hugged her before leaving. "You're giving us back time we didn't even know we'd lost," she whispered. Marge stayed behind, stacking their empty cups. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like the one who'd lost something. She felt like the one who'd reclaimed everything that mattered. That night, her phone rang. Once, twice, then again. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Crystal. Marge let it ring. The voicemail icon appeared seconds later, blinking persistently. She poured herself tea instead, humming softly as she walked to the balcony. The city glimmered beneath her, a scattering of lights across the dark, like stories being written in windows. Somewhere down there, she imagined Brian sitting in silence, the weight of what he'd traded pressing finally against him. Crystal would still be talking, always talking, trying to build sympathy out of smoke. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message. "Crystal, he's not well. We have nowhere to go. Please, just talk to him. He's your son." Marge stared at the words. Then, with a single motion, she swiped left and hit block. The screen went dark. Outside, a faint breeze stirred the curtains. She stepped into the night air, looking out over Spokane's quiet skyline. The maple trees in the park below were bare now, their branches skeletal and honest against the moonlight. She thought about all the rooms she'd lived in, the ones she'd filled with noise, the ones she'd emptied with courage. This one, finally, belonged to her. She turned back inside, where the little card on her fridge caught the glow of her kitchen light. "You gave us a home." It made her chest tighten, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She smiled. "That'll do," she whispered. Later, she sat at her desk, the glow of her lamp soft against the pages of her notebook. She began writing the outline for a new talk, lecture topic, what we keep after letting go. She paused, tapping her pen against the paper. Then, slowly, she wrote beneath it. Lesson 2. Sometimes love must end to leave room for respect. She closed the notebook and exhaled, a long breath that felt like finality and freedom rolled, he together. Morning came soft and gold, one of those Spokane mornings that smelled faintly of wet grass and something clean, like the world had started over while no one was watching. Marge walked through Bonito Park with a paper cup of coffee in hand, steam curling up into the crisp air. The paths were damp from last night's rain, the maple leaves slick and glistening beneath her shoes. Joggers passed by, their breath white and fleeting. Somewhere off the trail, a child's laughter floated toward her, distant, light, and familiar in a way that didn't hurt anymore. She found her favorite bench, the one beneath the old elm that bowed slightly toward the pond. The wood was cool beneath her hands, the same bench she'd sat on with Donita years ago, trading life stories between sips of coffee and the slow unfolding of time. She eased herself down, setting her bag beside her. The journal came out first, navy blue, corners soft with use. She opened to a blank page and let the silence settle. The park was waking up around her, ducks gliding across the water, a cyclist ringing a bell in the distance, wind threading through the branches above. It was the kind of morning she used to rush through, always moving toward something that belonged to someone else. Now, there was nowhere she needed to be. No debt. No guilt. No voices telling her what she owed. She took a sip of coffee, its warmth spreading through her chest. For a long moment, she just breathed. Slow and deliberate, the way people do when they finally understand they've survived something. Then she picked up her pen. On the page, in her careful, looping handwriting, she wrote, "The home wasn't the house. It was never them." The words sat there, stark and clean, as true as breath. She underlined the sentence once, then leaned back against the bench, watching sunlight break through the thin veil of clouds. It struck the pond in gold shards, rippling across the surface like a benediction. Her phone buzzed on the bench beside her. She smiled before even checking. She had a feeling she knew who it was. It was a text from Tessa. "Tessa, thought you'd want to see this." Below it, a photo loaded slowly. The familiar white fence in front of the house, now painted with careful strokes of blue and yellow. Across the slats, in uneven letters big enough for the whole street to see, the children had written, "Welcome home." For a moment, Marge's vision blurred. Not from sadness, but from something quieter. The way gratitude can sneak up on you and take the air right out of your lungs. She typed back, "It suits the place. And the people." Then she added a small heart, something she hadn't used in years, and hit send. A breeze lifted the edge of her scarf, brushing her cheek. She closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the sun. Behind her, a dog barked playfully. Ahead, the pond glimmered brighter as the day came fully alive. Somewhere in that stillness, Marge felt a small shift, not the ache of loss, but the hum of continuity. Life, she realized, didn't end when you walked away. Sometimes it finally began. She thought of Donita's laugh, of Caleb's letter, of Ruth and Jeanette, and all the women learning to reclaim themselves one Tuesday at a time. She thought of Tessa and her children, of the yellow roses that once sat in her own vase, and how they'd been replaced by hydrangeas, and how one day those, too, would fade. Everything did. And yet, everything left behind something better. Marge reached into her bag and pulled out one last envelope, the invitation from the network Dana had mentioned. The one with her name printed neatly at the top. Keynote speaker, Marjorie Lewis. The cost of silence, the price of freedom. She smiled as she slid it back into her journal. Not pride, not quite. Something humbler. Peace. The park was almost empty now, the world slipping quietly into noon. Marge finished her coffee and stood, brushing a leaf from her coat sleeve. She looked out over the pond one last time, the sunlight trembling on the surface, and whispered, "That'll do." As she turned down the path toward home, her reflection rippled across the water. Steady, unbroken. The maple branches above swayed in approval.